There is a specific temperature where a computer chip stops being a brain and starts being a piece of molten rock. It is 1414 degrees Celsius. In exactly 4 minutes, 50 million servers inside Amazon, Google, and the Pentagon are going to hit that temperature simultaneously. On the live stream playing on my laptop, the world is cheering. They are watching my uncle, Marcus Thorne, walk onto a stage in San Francisco. He is wearing a $6,000 suit. He is telling them that he has created the perfect chip. He is telling them that he has eliminated all impurities to create the fastest processor in human history. He is lying. Not because he is evil, but because he is a salesman who thinks he can negotiate with the laws of physics. He fired me 18 months ago because I insisted on adding dirt to the recipe. I wanted to inject chaotic boron isotopes into the silicon to stop the electrons from jumping the gates. He called it contamination. He scrubbed the recipe. He made the silicon 100% pure. He forgot one simple thing: at the quantum level, purity isn't efficiency. Purity is a short circuit. I am currently sitting in a shed in the Oregon woods. I have disconnected my house from the electrical grid. I have a gas generator running. And I have just bet every single dollar to my name that the internet is about to burn down. Marcus thinks he sold the world the future. He actually just sold them a $50 billion fuse. And I'm the only one waiting for the bang. The air in a Class 1 cleanroom doesn't smell like anything. That is the point. It is air that has been scrubbed, filtered, and sterilized until it lacks the basic chaotic signature of reality. It is dead air. It is recycled 400 times an hour, stripped of dust, skin cells, and history. I stood in the center of the lab, encased in a white Gore-Tex bunny suit, listening to the rhythmic thrum hiss of the extreme ultraviolet, EUV, lithography machine. It was a beast of a machine, a $100 million printer designed to etch patterns smaller than a strand of DNA onto a wafer of silicon that looked like a black mirror. My name is Elias Thorne. I am 34 years old, and for the last 6 years, I have lived inside this suit. I don't see the sun much. I don't have a dog. I don't have a girlfriend. I have silicon. Elias? The voice crackled over the intercom system, breaking the sterile silence. It was Marcus. My uncle. The CEO of Thorne Semi. I pressed the button on my wrist. I'm here, Marcus. The investors are getting twitchy, Elias, Marcus said. His voice was tight, pitched high with the specific anxiety of a man who has leveraged his mortgage to pay for liquid nitrogen. NVIDIA just announced their 3-nanometer architecture. They're claiming 40% efficiency gains. If we don't have a prototype by the end of the quarter, we're dead. The Series B funding dries up. I looked through the yellow-tinted glass of the observation window. I could see the blurry outline of Marcus standing in the viewing gallery. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car, pacing back and forth. He was a salesman. He sold dreams. I was the mechanic who had to build the engine to fly them. NVIDIA is lying, I said calmly. Or at least, they're stretching the truth. Their 3-nanometer chip leaks energy like a sieve. They're just cranking up the cooling to compensate. I don't care about their cooling. Marcus snapped. I care that they have a product and we have a very expensive paperweight. Are we going to run the test or not? Initiating now, I said. I turned back to the console. The wafer inside the machine was the result of 3 years of failure. We were trying to do the impossible. We were trying to break the 1-nanometer barrier. For 50 years, Moore's law had held true: the number of transistors on a chip doubles every 2 years. We shrank them from millimeters to micrometers, then to nanometers. But we had hit a wall. A physical, hard wall set by the universe itself. When a transistor gate gets smaller than 2 nanometers, the silicon lattice becomes too thin to hold the electrons back. The laws of classical physics break down, and quantum mechanics takes over. You try to switch the transistor to off, but the electron, behaving like a wave, simply teleports through the gate. It's called quantum tunneling. The result isn't a computer. It's a heater. The chip consumes power, leaks it as heat, and calculates nothing. Spinning up, I muttered. I watched the telemetry on the monitors. The voltage ramped up. 0.1 volts. 0.3 volts. 0.7 volts. The graph on the main screen showed the leakage current. It should be a flat line near zero. Instead, it spiked. A jagged red mountain rising on the screen. Warning, thermal excursion detected. Core temp, 110 degrees Celsius. Logic failure. The machine initiated an emergency shutdown to save the wafer from melting. I slumped against the console. Another failure. Another $50,000 wafer turned into expensive sand. Elias? Marcus's voice was heavy. What happened? It tunneled, I said, rubbing my eyes through the plastic face shield. The lattice is too perfect. The electrons are sliding right through. It's not holding the charge. There was a long silence on the intercom. Fix it, Marcus whispered. Just fix it, Elias. We have 2 weeks before the money is gone. The intercom clicked off. I sat on the floor of the cleanroom. The hum of the scrubbers felt louder now, mocking me. The problem was purity. The entire semiconductor industry is built on a religion of purity. We spend billions to create silicon wafers that are 99.9999999% pure. We eliminate every rogue atom. We polish the surface until it is the flattest object in the universe. The theory is that purity equals speed. If the road is smooth, the car goes fast. But at 1 nanometer, the road was too smooth. The car wasn't just going fast, it was sliding off the track. The electrons had no resistance. They weren't obeying the stop signs. I closed my eyes and visualized the atomic structure. I saw the silicon atoms arranged in their perfect diamond cubic lattice. I saw the electrons flowing like a river. How do you stop a river without building a wall? You put rocks in it. You create turbulence. My eyes snapped open. Turbulence, I whispered. It was counterintuitive. It was heresy. Every textbook on lithography said that impurities increase resistance and slow down the chip. Impurities create heat. Impurities are the enemy. But we weren't operating in the classical world anymore. We were in the quantum world. And in the quantum world, you need to break the wave function. I stood up and walked over to the chemical storage locker. I scanned my badge. The heavy steel door hissed open. Inside were canisters of dopants, chemicals used to alter the electrical properties of silicon. Phosphorus, arsenic, antimony, and boron. Specifically, isotope 10 boron. We used boron for standard p-type doping, but always in trace amounts, and always filtered to be hyper-pure. I grabbed a canister. I brought it to the deposition chamber. I pulled up the fabrication recipe on the computer. It was a complex script of 4,000 steps. Layering, etching, polishing, baking. I scrolled to step 2400, gate channel deposition. I opened the code editor. Standard protocol called for a pure crystalline growth. I deleted that line. I typed in a new command. Inject, boron 10 isotope. Concentration, high, dirty profile. Pattern, stochastic scatter. I was essentially throwing a handful of dirt into the most precise machine ever built. I was introducing noise into the channel. If any other engineer saw this, they would have me committed. It was vandalism. It was messy. It was ugly. But if I was right, those heavy boron atoms would act as quantum speed bumps. They wouldn't stop the flow of electricity, but they would disrupt the wave function just enough to prevent the electrons from tunneling when the gate was closed. I loaded a fresh wafer. One last try, I said to the empty room. I hit execute. The machine groaned as the high-energy laser struck the tin droplet, generating the extreme ultraviolet light needed to carve the pattern. It took 4 hours. I stood there the entire time, watching the progress bar. My legs ached. My mouth was dry. But I didn't leave. At 3 a.m., the machine chimed. Processing complete. I moved the wafer to the testing cradle. I connected the microscopic probes. I keyed the mic. Marcus? You awake? I'm in the office, he answered instantly. He never went home. Did it work? I don't know yet. I'm powering it on. I typed the command. Voltage, 0.1 volts. Voltage, half a volt. Voltage, 1.0 volts. I stared at the leakage graph. In the previous test, the red line had spiked vertically. Now? The line sat at the bottom of the graph. A flat, steady green line. Leakage current, 0.001 nanoamperes. Logic state, stable. Frequency, 8.5 GHz. I stopped breathing. 8.5 GHz. That wasn't just an improvement. It was a generational leap. It was twice as fast as the best chip on the market, running at half the power. I pushed the voltage higher. 1.5 volts. The line stayed flat. The boron atoms were catching the tunneling electrons, holding them back, forcing them to obey the logic gate. The dirt was working. The chaos was creating order. Elias? Marcus asked, his voice trembling. Talk to me. What are the numbers? I stared at the screen. I had just broken the angstrom barrier. I had just changed the world. It works, Marcus, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It holds. We have a 1 nanometer chip. And it's running cold. Are you sure? I'm looking at the data. It's stable. We did it. I heard a sound I had never heard before. Marcus let out a scream of pure, unadulterated joy. It sounded like a wolf howling at the moon. Stay there. He yelled. I'm coming down. Don't touch anything. I'm coming in. I leaned back in my chair, watching the green line hum. I felt a profound sense of peace. It wasn't about the money for me. It wasn't about the stock price. It was about the puzzle. The universe had said no, and I had found a way to say yes. The door to the cleanroom airlock hissed open. Marcus stumbled in. He wasn't wearing a bunny suit. He hadn't scrubbed in. He was violating a dozen safety protocols, contaminating the room with every step, but he didn't care. He ran to the console. He looked at the numbers. 8 gigahertz, he whispered. He touched the screen with a trembling finger. Do you know what this is worth, Elias? It's worth a Nobel Prize, I said, smiling. Maybe 2. Marcus turned to look at me. His eyes were wide, dilated, manic. He wasn't seeing the science. He was seeing the zeros. Nobel Prize? He laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. Screw the Nobel Prize, Elias. This is worth trillions. This is the spine of the 21st century. AI, defense, cloud, they all need this. And we own it. He grabbed my shoulders. His grip was surprisingly strong. We own it, right? The patent is locked? I filed the provisional last week, I said. The specific dirty doping methodology is the key claim. Dirty doping, Marcus repeated. That's the secret? The dirt? Yes. It's counterintuitive. If anyone tries to reverse engineer it, they'll clean the silicon and fail. They won't realize the impurity is the feature. Marcus stared at the wafer. A slow, strange smile spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of partnership. It was the smile of a predator that has just realized the prey is asleep. Brilliant, he whispered. Absolutely brilliant. He straightened his tie, smoothing out the wrinkles of his expensive suit. The manic energy seemed to condense into something colder, sharper. Upload the full documentation to the secure server, Marcus ordered. Every line of code. Every chemical ratio. Tonight. I plan to, I said. I need to clean up the data logs first. No, Marcus said. Now. Before you leave the building. Okay, I said, confused by his intensity. Marcus, relax. We won. We saved the company. Yes, Marcus said, looking at me with eyes that suddenly felt very distant. We saved the company. You did good work, Elias. You really did. He patted my shoulder again, but this time it felt dismissive. Like you would pat a dog. Go upload the files, he said. I need to make some calls. I watched him walk out of the clean room. I turned back to my machine. I felt the thrill of victory, the rush of discovery. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time I would ever touch the machine I built. I didn't know that while I was looking at the atoms, Marcus was looking at the exit strategy. I uploaded the files. I gave him the keys to the kingdom. And in doing so, I sealed my own fate. The celebratory dinner was held 3 days later at La Bernardine in Manhattan. It is a place where the fish is flown in daily from Tokyo and the silence is heavy with the scent of old money. I felt like an alien. I was wearing my only suit, a charcoal gray off-the-rack number that fit poorly around the shoulders. My hands were still dry and cracked from the harsh soaps of the decontamination showers. I smelled like industrial sanitizer. The restaurant smelled of white truffles and power. Marcus sat across from me. He looked magnificent. He was glowing. It wasn't just the expensive lighting, it was the aura of a man who had just won the lottery. He ordered a bottle of 1982 Chateau Margaux without looking at the price list. To the angstrom, Marcus said, raising his glass. The wine was a deep, blood-red ruby. To the angstrom, I repeated, clinking my glass against his. I took a sip. It tasted like berries and smoke. I didn't know much about wine. I knew about silicon lattices. So, I said, leaning forward. What's the play, Marcus? We have the prototype. Do we license it to NVIDIA? Do we build our own fab? I was thinking about the scaling issues. The boron injection needs a specialized nozzle if we're going to do mass production. I drew up some schematics for. Marcus held up a hand, stopping me. He smiled, but it was a tight, practiced expression. It didn't reach his eyes. Slow down, Elias. You're always running. Always solving the next problem. That's the job, I said. That was the job, Marcus corrected. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick document bound in blue heavy stock paper. He slid it across the white tablecloth. It hit my wine glass with a soft clink. What is this? I asked. It's the future, Elias. Open it. I flipped the cover. The text was dense, legal boilerplate, but the header was bold and centered. Merger and acquisition agreement between Thorne Semiconductor Incorporated and Titan Foundry Global. My breath hitched. Titan Foundry. They were the apex predator of the semiconductor world. They own the factories in Taiwan, Arizona, and Germany. They printed 60% of the world's chips. They want a partner? I asked, scanning the page. They don't partner, Elias. They acquire. Marcus took a slow sip of his wine, watching me closely. They bought us. Lock, stock, and barrel. I felt a rush of adrenaline. Bought us? For how much? $4 billion. The number hung in the air between us. 4 billion. It was a number so large it felt abstract, like the distance to a star. It was enough money to build a city. Enough money to fund 1,000 labs. 4 billion, I whispered. Marcus, that's. We're rich. Marcus set his glass down. He adjusted his cufflinks. I'm rich, Elias. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Excuse me? Turn to page 40. Section 8.1. Intellectual Property Assignment. My hands were shaking as I turned the pages. I found the section. It referenced an employment contract dated 5 years ago. The day we started the company in his garage. All intellectual property, inventions, and patents developed by employee during the term of employment are the sole and exclusive property of the company. Employee waives all moral rights and claims to ownership. I remember signing this, I said, my voice sounding thin. It's standard boilerplate. But I'm a co-founder, Marcus. I have equity. I have 40% of the shares. Marcus sighed. It was a sound of disappointment, as if I were a slow student. You had 40% of the shares, Elias. But you didn't read the board minutes from last year's series of funding round. The dilution clause was triggered when we missed the Q3 targets. Your shares were converted to non-voting Class B stock. And under the terms of this acquisition, Class B stock is liquidated at par value. I stared at him. The words were English, but they didn't make sense. Liquidated? At par value? You get a payout, of course, Marcus said, waving his hand generously. $2 million. It's a lot of money, Elias. You can buy a nice house. You can retire. You're 34 years old. 2 million? I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Heads turned at the nearby tables. We just sold for 4 billion. I built the chip, Marcus. I built the damn thing. You couldn't tell a transistor from a toaster. Sit down, Marcus hissed. His voice was a whip crack. I won't sit down. You're stealing it. I am capitalizing it. Marcus leaned across the table, his face hardening into stone. You think you built this? You tinkered, Elias. You played with chemicals in a sandbox that I paid for. I raised the seed capital. I kept the lights on when you wasted 3 years chasing dead ends. I managed the investors when you were too busy staring at microscopes to answer an email. The dirty dopant, I stammered. The boron injection. That's mine. It's my idea. It's in the patent filing. The patent belongs to Thorne Semiconductor, Marcus said coldly. And Thorne Semiconductor now belongs to Titan Foundry. He checked his Rolex. The deal closed an hour ago, Elias. The wire transfer has already cleared. The company is gone. It's Titan now. I looked at the document. I looked at the man who had been at my graduation, the man who had told me we were going to change the world together. Why? I asked. We could have run it together. We could have been giants. Marcus leaned back, his mask of civility returning. Titan doesn't want you, Elias. I tried. Really, I did. But they looked at your personnel file. The erratic hours. The unauthorized chemical experiments. The refusal to follow standard cleanroom protocols. They see a liability. They see a loose cannon. I broke the barrier because I didn't follow protocol. Exactly, Marcus said. And now that the barrier is broken, we don't need the guy who breaks things. We need engineers who follow orders. We need scale. We need stability. Titan offered me the CEO position of the new division. Me. Not us. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a white envelope. He placed it on the table next to the wine. Your severance package. $2 million, conditioned on your signature on a non-disparagement agreement. You walk away. You don't talk to the press. You don't claim you invented the angstrom process. You disappear. I looked at the envelope. It felt like looking at a coffin. And if I don't sign? Then you get nothing, Marcus said simply. And I will sue you for the unauthorized use of company resources for your little dirty doping experiments. I'll tie you up in court until you starve. I looked around the restaurant. The waiters were gliding by with silver trays. The patrons were laughing softly. The world was moving on, completely unaware that a crime was happening in plain sight. I realized then that I had already lost. I had lost the moment I walked into the lab 6 years ago and decided that science was more important than business. I had played chess against a man playing poker. I reached out and took the envelope. Smart boy, Marcus said. He poured himself another glass of wine. You'll thank me one day. You're not cut out for the big leagues, Elias. You're too emotional. I have one question, I said. Shoot. Do you understand how it works? The chip? Marcus laughed. He swirled the wine in his glass. It works because we're geniuses, Elias. It works because it's smaller. That's all that matters. The impurity, I said. The boron. Do you understand why it's there? It's a manufacturing detail, Marcus said dismissively. We have teams of Ph.D.s at Titan who handle the details. I handle the vision. Right, I said. The vision. I turned to leave. 2 men in dark suits were standing at the entrance of the private room. They weren't waiters. They were Titan security. They'll escort you out, Marcus said. And Elias? Don't go back to the office. Your badge has been deactivated. Your personal effects will be mailed to you. I didn't look back. I walked between the two guards. We moved through the dining room, past the happy couples and the business deals. We walked out onto the street. The New York air was cold and smelled of exhaust. One of the guards stepped in front of me. He held out his hand. Phone and laptop, Mr. Thorne. Company property. I stared at him. My phone? It has my pictures. My contacts. Company data policy. It was bought by the company. Hand it over. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was a shattering moment of realization. I didn't own anything. My tools, my data, my communication, my life's work. It all belonged to the entity I had helped build. I placed the phone in his palm. Laptop is in my bag at the apartment, I lied. We know, the guard said. A team is already there retrieving it. Your landlord let them in. A cold chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the wind. They had scrubbed me. I was being deleted. Go home, Mr. Thorne, the guard said, not unkindly. It's over. I stood on the sidewalk as they got into a black SUV and drove away. I watched the taillights disappear into traffic. I was alone. I walked to the subway station. My mind was racing, replaying the conversation, the betrayal, the smirk on Marcus's face. It's a manufacturing detail, he had said. He didn't know. He truly didn't know. He thought the dirty doping was just a recipe step. A dash of salt in the soup. He didn't understand that it was the structural integrity of the entire dam. I sat on the plastic bench of the subway platform. A rat scurried along the tracks. I should have been angry. I should have been planning a lawsuit, or a press conference, or a scene. But as the train rattled into the station, a strange calmness settled over me. It was the cold, hard logic of the engineer. Marcus had stolen the car. He had kicked me out of the driver's seat. He was speeding down the highway at 200 miles an hour, celebrating his victory. But he didn't know that the brakes were made of a very specific alloy that only I knew how to maintain. And he had just fired the mechanic. I got on the train. I didn't go home to my apartment. I knew it would be tossed. I went to the bank. I deposited the check. Then I went to the library, opened a brokerage account, and waited for the physics to catch up with the greed. The Sonoran Desert does not forgive. It is a landscape of baked earth, saguaro cacti standing like sentinels, and a sun that feels less like a celestial body and more like a physical weight. In the middle of this scorched earth, 20 miles outside of Phoenix, stood the Titan Foundry Fab 9. It was a monolith of concrete and steel, a windowless fortress covering 2 million square feet. It consumed as much water as a small city and as much electricity as a steel mill. Inside, the temperature was a constant 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was filtered to Class 1 purity. It was the most expensive building on planet Earth. Marcus Thorne stood in the observation gallery overlooking the cleanroom floor. He wore a bespoke Italian suit that cost $6,000, contrasting sharply with the sea of workers below him shuffling around in white bunny suits. It's impressive, isn't it? The man standing next to Marcus was Gunther Kovac, the chief operations officer of Titan Foundry. Kovac was a German engineer with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. He looked at wafers the way a butcher looks at a cow: cuts, yield, and profit. It's a cathedral, Marcus said, leaning against the glass. And my chip is the scripture. The Nexus chip, Kovac corrected gently. Branding wants to move away from the Thorne name. Too boutique. Nexus implies connectivity. Centrality. Fine, Marcus said, waving a hand. Call it what you want. As long as the royalties check clears. They turned away from the window and walked into the executive conference room. A dozen engineers and accountants were waiting, seated around a table made of polished mahogany. On the wall, a projection screen displayed the manufacturing metrics for the upcoming Q4 production run. This was the ramp-up meeting. The moment where the prototype becomes a product. The moment where science becomes logistics. Let's review the BOM, Kovac said, taking a seat at the head of the table. Bill of materials and process timeline. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. It was a dense grid of chemical acronyms, gas flow rates, and exposure times. Marcus scanned it. He felt a swell of pride. He didn't understand every acronym, of course. Elias had been the nerd, but he understood the bottom line. And the bottom line looked good. Yield rates are projected at 40% for the first run, Kovac said. Low, but acceptable for a 1 nanometer process. However, the cycle time is problematic. Problematic how? Marcus asked. It takes 6 weeks to process a wafer from start to finish, Kovac explained. That's standard. But we have a bottleneck at layer 40. The deposition phase. Kovac pointed a laser pointer at a line item halfway down the list. Step 2400, isotope 10 boron injection, non-standard. Status, high cost/high latency. This step, Kovac said. It adds 4 hours to the lithography cycle. And the cost of isotope 10 boron has tripled in the last month. There's a global shortage. Marcus frowned. He remembered the boron. He remembered Elias talking about it in the lab, babbling about quantum speed bumps and dirty profiles. Why is it a bottleneck? Marcus asked. Because the machines have to stop, the lead process engineer spoke up. He was a young man named Davis, eager to impress. We have to purge the chamber, inject this dirty isotope, let it settle, and then purge the chamber again to resume the pure silicon growth. It's like stopping a race car to throw sand in the gas tank. Sand in the gas tank, Marcus repeated. He thought back to the early days of Thorne Semiconductor. He remembered Elias's lab. It was a mess. Coffee cups on the workbench, tangled wires, salvaged parts from eBay. Elias was a genius, yes, but he was chaotic. He solved problems with duct tape. Marcus convinced himself of a narrative right then and there. Elias used the boron to patch a flaw in his cheap equipment. The dirty doping wasn't a feature of the chip architecture, it was a crutch for Elias's inability to maintain a pure vacuum in a garage lab. But this wasn't a garage. This was Fab 9. This was the pinnacle of human engineering. It's contamination, Marcus said aloud. The room went quiet. Excuse me, sir? Davis asked. The boron, Marcus said, standing up and walking to the screen. Elias Thorne. My former partner. He was a brilliant theorist, but a terrible experimentalist. He had contamination issues in his reactor. He likely added the boron to stabilize the lattice because he couldn't achieve true vacuum purity. Marcus turned to face the room. He channeled every ounce of his CEO charisma. We don't have contamination issues here, do we, Gunther? Absolutely not, Kovac bristled. Our vacuum chambers are harder than deep space. Exactly, Marcus said. So why are we following a recipe designed for a garage? We are Titan Foundry. We deal in purity. 99.99999%. He tapped the screen. If we remove this step, this dirty doping, what happens to the cycle time? Davis ran a quick calculation on his tablet. We save 4 hours per wafer. Throughput increases by 18%. And the cost? We save $15 million a quarter in raw materials. Marcus smiled. It was the smile of a man who sees a bonus check on the horizon. Remove it, Marcus ordered. The engineers looked at each other. There was a hesitation in the air, the instinctive fear of changing a working recipe. Sir, Davis ventured cautiously. The provisional patent documents specify this doping profile as critical for tunneling mitigation. If we remove it, are we sure the gate logic will hold? Marcus felt a flare of irritation. Tunneling mitigation? That's fancy talk for I made a mess and need to cover it up. Elias didn't understand the capabilities of a Tier 1 fab. He was designing for the lowest common denominator. Marcus placed his hands on the table, leaning in. Listen to me. Marketing is selling the Nexus as the purest silicon brain ever created. Pure. Not doped with boron dirt. If we ship chips full of impurities, Nvidia will tear us apart in the press. They'll call it sloppy. They'll call it low grade. He looked at Kovac. Gunther, you want 15% better margins? You want to hit the Q4 targets early? Kovac nodded slowly. The math was seductive. Pure silicon conducts better. Less resistance means less heat. Theoretically, removing the impurity should make the chip faster. It's physics, Marcus said, using a word he didn't understand to end an argument he couldn't win on merits. Clean the line. Scrub the recipe. I want the Nexus chip to be the most perfect crystal of silicon ever grown by mankind. We should run a simulation, Davis suggested weakly. Just to be sure. We don't have time for simulations. Marcus snapped. The Amazon AWS contract requires delivery in 6 months. If we miss the window, we pay penalties. Do you want to explain to the board why we missed a delivery date because we were afraid to make the product better? Silence filled the room. No one wanted to be the one to delay the launch. Groupthink settled in like a heavy fog. Scrub the step, Kovach said finally. Update the bomb. Step 2400 is deleted. Davis typed the command into his laptop. Delete line 2400. Confirm? YN. He hit Y. Done, Davis said. The wafers currently in the queue will be processed with the new pure profile starting at midnight. Excellent, Marcus said. He adjusted his tie. Gentlemen, we just streamlined the future. Later that night, Marcus sat in his hotel room in Scottsdale. He poured himself a whiskey. He walked out onto the balcony and looked at the desert stars. He felt a fleeting moment of doubt, just a whisper. What if Elias was right? He remembered the intensity in Elias's eyes. It's the dam, Marcus. Marcus took a sip of whiskey and shook his head. Elias was a dramatic, emotional wreck. He was bitter about being bought out. Of course he would claim his secret sauce was essential. It was his ego talking. Marcus looked at his phone. The stock ticker for Titan Foundry, TFG, was up another 4% in after-hours trading. The market loved the rumors of the high production yields. You were a good mechanic, Elias, Marcus whispered to the night air. But you didn't know how to drive. He went back inside and closed the sliding glass door. 20 miles away, inside the windowless fortress of Fab 9, the great lithography machines hummed to life. The robotic arms reached out and grabbed the black silicon wafers. They moved them into the vacuum chambers. The lasers fired. The patterns were etched. But when the time came for step 2400, the injection of the chaotic, stabilizing boron atoms, the machine skipped a beat. It moved smoothly to the next step. It laid down pure, unadulterated silicon. Layer after perfect layer. It was creating a masterpiece of order. A structure of absolute, crystalline perfection. And at the quantum level, the electrons were waiting. They saw the smooth, unguarded walls of the new transistors. They saw the lack of resistance. If electrons could smile, they would have. The dam had been removed. The flood was coming. Time moves differently when you aren't measuring it in clock cycles. In the cleanroom, a nanosecond was an eternity. A gigahertz was a heartbeat. Time was sliced into slivers so thin they felt like physical objects. But out here, in the damp, moss-covered woods of the Oregon Cascades, time was measured in seasons. In the growth of fern fronds. In the slow, relentless decay of fallen logs. I had bought a small cabin near the town of Bend with a fraction of my severance money. It was a fixer-upper, a drafty A-frame that smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. I didn't buy a computer. I didn't have Wi-Fi. I barely had cell service. Instead, I built a workshop in the shed. I bought Japanese chisels, hand planes, and saws. I started working with wood. Wood is honest. If the grain runs one way and you plane it the other, it tears. It tells you immediately that you are wrong. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't let you cheat with marketing buzzwords or quarterly earnings reports. You respect the material, or you fail. For 18 months, I was a ghost. To the world, Elias Thorne was a footnote. A disgruntled co-founder who had been bought out and faded into obscurity. Retirement at 34, the blogs called it. They painted me as a lucky lottery winner who lacked the ambition to stay in the game. I let them believe it. But every Tuesday, I drove my beat-up Ford truck into town to buy groceries. And every Tuesday, I walked past the newsstand outside the pharmacy. I watched the face of my uncle, Marcus Thorne, grow larger and more confident with every magazine cover. Wired, the prophet of silicon. Forbes, Titan's trillion-dollar gamble, inside the Nexus chip. Time, the end of latency. I bought the magazines. I took them back to the cabin. I read them by the light of a kerosene lamp, analyzing every quote, every spec sheet, every boast. The marketing machine was terrifyingly effective. Titan Foundry had spent hundreds of millions of dollars convincing the world that the Nexus chip wasn't just a processor, it was the next step in human evolution. It is the purest silicon ever manufactured, Marcus said in a CNN interview. I traced the line of his jaw with my finger on the glossy page. He looked older, tired, but manic. We have eliminated the impurities that held back previous generations. We have achieved a state of quantum perfection. Quantum perfection. I laughed aloud in the empty cabin. The sound bounced off the timber walls. He was selling the bug as a feature. He was bragging about the fact that he had removed the brakes from the car. I turned the page to the technical breakdown. It was light on engineering and heavy on hype, but the numbers were there for anyone who knew how to look. Clock speed, 12.0 GHz. Voltage, 0.8 volts. Thermal design power, TDP, 250 watts. My stomach tightened. 12 GHz? At sub 1 nanometer geometry? Without the boron dopant to catch the tunneling electrons, that kind of frequency would turn the chip into a chaotic particle accelerator. But the most chilling part wasn't the specs. It was the customer list. Marcus had pre-sold the entire first production run. 50 million chips. And he hadn't sold them to gamers for their PlayStations. He hadn't sold them for iPhones. He had sold them to the infrastructure of civilization. Ether Cloud. The backbone of the internet. They hosted everything from Netflix to hospital records to banking transactions. They were replacing their entire North American server farm with Nexus blades. Search Giant. They were integrating Nexus into their AI training clusters. The brain that indexed the world's knowledge was about to be transplanted. Defense, Net. The Department of Defense. They were upgrading the autonomous drone command centers and the ballistic missile early warning systems. I put the magazine down. My hands were trembling, covered in sawdust. This wasn't just a corporate failure anymore. This was a systemic risk event. When those chips turned on, really turned on, under full load, it wouldn't just be a server crash. It would be a blackout. I stared at the wood stove. I thought about calling a journalist. And say what? Hello, I'm the disgruntled ex-employee who was fired for incompetence, and I claim the world's most expensive technology is broken because it's too pure. Titan's lawyers would crush me before the article even went to print. I signed the NDA. I signed the non-disparagement agreement. They would sue me for every penny I had, and then they would release their own internal data, faked, binned, or massaged, to prove me wrong. No. Words wouldn't stop this. Physics would stop this. And in the financial world, when you know a disaster is coming that no one else sees, you don't write an op-ed. You place a bet. October arrived with a cold snap. The ferns turned brown and curled into themselves. The launch date was set for October 12th. It was branded as the Singularity event. A synchronized global switchover. Ether Cloud and Search Giant wanted to demonstrate the seamless power of the Nexus architecture by migrating their live workloads simultaneously at noon, Eastern Standard Time. It was hubris on a biblical scale. On October 10th, I drove into town. I didn't go to the grocery store. I went to the public library. It was a quiet building with gray carpet and the smell of old paper. I sat at a public terminal in the back corner. I logged into my brokerage account. I had $550,000 in liquid assets. The remnants of my payout after taxes and buying the cabin. I pulled up the ticker for TFG, Titan Foundry Global. The stock was trading at an all-time high, $458 a share. The market capitalization was nearing $2 trillion. The hype had inflated a bubble so thin it shimmered. I looked at the options chain. I wasn't an investor. I was an engineer. But math is math. And the math of the stock market allowed for leverage. I looked at put options. A put option is a contract that gives you the right to sell a stock at a specific price by a specific date. It is a bet that the price will go down. If you buy a put option with a strike price of $400, and the stock drops to $300, you make money. If the stock drops to zero, you make a fortune. But if the stock stays up, you lose everything. The option expires worthless. I looked at the expiration date, October 14th. 2 days after the launch. The premiums were expensive because the volatility was high. Everyone expected the stock to soar after the launch. Nobody was betting on a crash. I typed in the order. Buy, 5,000 put contracts. Strike price, $200. Expiration, October 14th. This was an aggressive, insane bet. I was betting that the stock would lose more than half its value in 48 hours. I was betting on a catastrophe. The cost of the trade was $548,000. Almost every dollar I had to my name. My finger hovered over the mouse button. I thought about Marcus. I thought about the way he looked at me in the restaurant, like I was a child playing with toys. You're a mechanic, Elias. I thought about the clean room. The silence. The elegance of the boron atoms holding the line against the chaos. Marcus had bet against the laws of physics. I was betting on them. I clicked submit. Order filled. I sat back in the creaky library chair. I was technically broke. If the Nexus chip worked, if by some miracle of God, the electrons decided to stop tunneling, I would be destitute. I would lose the cabin. I would be chopping wood for other people to survive. But I wasn't worried. I felt a strange, cold certainty. I walked out of the library. The air was crisp. I went to the hardware store and bought a generator and 20 gallons of gasoline. If the power grid was tied into the Nexus infrastructure, I might need my own electricity for a while. The day before. October 11th. The world was buzzing. It felt like the day before the moon landing, or the release of the first iPhone. The news cycle was 24/7 Nexus coverage. I watched a segment on Bloomberg TV in the cabin, running off a portable antenna. An anchor with perfect hair was interviewing Gunther Kovich, the COO of Titan Foundry. Gunther, the anchor asked, critics have said that moving so much critical infrastructure to a new architecture all at once is risky. What do you say to the skeptics? Kovich smiled. He looked confident. Innovation requires courage, Jim. We have tested these chips for thousands of hours. The purity of the silicon allows for thermal performance we've never seen before. We aren't just launching a chip, we are upgrading the central nervous system of the planet. Tested for thousands of hours. I knew how they tested. They tested bin chips. They ran them at 30% load. They ran them in cold rooms. They ran synthetic benchmarks that touched the logic gates in predictable patterns. They hadn't run the switch over. They hadn't subjected the chips to the chaotic, messy, high-voltage reality of the live internet. They hadn't forced 50 million chips to run at 100% capacity simultaneously, generating heat that would feed back into the UN-doped silicon lattice. I turned off the TV. I went out to my woodpile. I grabbed my splitting maul. Thwack. 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 I split logs until my shoulders burned. I split logs until the sun went down and the moon rose, pale and cold over the pines. I was preparing for winter. And I was preparing for the fire. I slept soundly that night. It was the deep, dreamless sleep of a man who has done everything he can, and now simply waits for gravity to take over. The morning of the launch. October 12th. I woke up at dawn. I made coffee on the wood stove. I set up my laptop on the workbench in the shed. I tethered it to my phone, which had a single bar of 4G service. It was slow, but it was enough to load the data. I opened 2 windows on the screen. On the left, the Titan Foundry livestream. On the right, my brokerage account dashboard. The livestream showed a stage in San Francisco. It was bathed in blue light. Electronic music was thumping. It looked like a rock concert. Elias Thorne walked onto the stage. The crowd erupted. Thousands of tech journalists, investors, and fanboys cheered. Marcus waved, soaking it in. He looked like Caesar returning to Rome. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus boomed into the microphone. Welcome to the Angstrom era. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter and hot. For too long, Marcus said, pacing the stage, we have been held back by the limitations of materials. We accepted heat. We accepted latency. We accepted limits. He paused for effect. Today, we remove the limits. Today, we give the world a brain that thinks as fast as light. He pointed to the giant screen behind him. It showed a map of the world, with glowing nodes representing the data centers coming online. Virginia. Dublin. Frankfurt. Tokyo. Singapore. In 10 minutes, Marcus said, we will flip the switch. Ether Cloud and Search Giant will transfer 100% of their traffic to the Nexus grid. I looked at the time. 11:50 a.m. EST. I checked my brokerage account. TFG stock price, $465. My put options were currently worthless. On paper, I had lost $500,000. 10 minutes. I imagined the inside of the chips. I imagined the billions of 1 nanometer transistors, standing like soldiers in a field. They were naked. They were vulnerable. They lacked the boron armor I had designed for them. They were about to be hit by a tsunami of electrons. 5 minutes. Marcus shouted. The camera cut to the control room in Virginia. Engineers were sitting at consoles, looking bored. To them, this was just a migration script. Traffic_shift equals 100%. They didn't know they were sitting on top of a bomb. 1 minute. I leaned forward. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Not out of fear, but out of anticipation. It was the feeling of watching a demolition crew press the plunger on a condemned building. 10, 9, 8. The crowd chanted along. 3, 2, 1. Marcus pressed a giant, ceremonial button on a podium. Execute. He yelled. On the screen, the nodes on the map turned from yellow to green. System status, online. Load, 10%. Load, 40%. Load, 80%. The crowd cheered. The stock price ticked up to $470. It works. The announcer yelled. Smooth transition. We are live. I watched the load counter. Load, 100%. This was it. The full weight of the internet. Every Google search. Every Netflix stream. Every military sensor reading. Inside the chips, the electrons hit the gates. They didn't stop. They tunneled. The universe does not scream when it breaks. It whispers. On the massive screen behind Elias Thorne in San Francisco, the telemetry graphs were green. The load bars were steady at 100%. The crowd was roaring, a deafening sound of human approval that masked the silent, subatomic disaster unfolding across the globe. I sat in my shed in Oregon, the silence broken only by the hum of my laptop fan and the crackle of the wood stove. I wasn't watching Marcus. I was watching the timestamps on the data stream from the Ether Cloud status page, which I had opened in a command line terminal. Ping, 12 milliseconds. Ping, 12 milliseconds. Ping, 12 milliseconds. It works. The announcer on the livestream screamed. The transition is seamless. It did work. For the first 3 seconds. This is the cruelty of thermodynamics. It takes time for energy to convert into heat, and it takes time for heat to soak through a silicon die. The specific heat capacity of silicon is 0.7 joules per gram per Kelvin. It is a buffer. A temporary shield. For those first few seconds, the Nexus chips were processing data. The electrons were tunneling, yes, leaking through the gates like water through a mesh, but the error correction circuits, ECC, were catching them. Bit flip detected in core 4. Corrected. Bit flip detected in core 12. Corrected. Logic mismatch in a loop. Retrying. The chips were fighting for their lives. They were running the logic equivalent of a sprint while holding their breath. But every correction costs energy. Every retry pulls current. And current generates heat. I watched the ping times. Ping, 14 milliseconds. Ping, 19 milliseconds. Ping, 45 milliseconds. There it is, I whispered. The latency spike. The chips were getting hot. The resistance was changing. The logic gates were struggling to distinguish between a 0 and a 1. On the live stream, Marcus was beaming. He looked like a god. He raised his hands to quiet the applause. You are witnessing the death of lag. Marcus shouted. You are witnessing the birth of real-time intelligence. He pointed to the screen, where a live video feed from the Virginia data center showed rows of sleek, blue-lit server racks. They looked peaceful. Futuristic. Then, I saw it. In the bottom right corner of the server room feed, a technician walked into the frame. He wasn't walking calmly. He was running. He was wearing ear protection, which was standard, but he was pressing the cups against his head with his hands. He was looking at the racks in panic. The sound. The microphones on the livestream were tuned to Marcus's voice, filtering out background noise. But inside the data center, the sound must have been deafening. When a server fan spins at 15,000 RPM, it screams. When 10,000 fans spin up simultaneously to their maximum emergency RPM, it sounds like a jet engine taking off inside a closet. The chips were screaming for air. Inside the Ether Cloud data center, Virginia. Davis, the lead process engineer who had been promoted to site reliability manager after the cleanup of the old team, stared at his console. The room was vibrating. The floor tiles rattled against the subfloor. What is happening with the cooling loop? Davis yelled into his headset. Valves are open 100%. The facilities manager screamed back. Chillers are running max. The coolant return temp is spiking. Davis looked at the core temperature readouts for row 4. Temp, 95 degrees Celsius. Temp, 102 degrees Celsius. Temp, 115 degrees Celsius. That's impossible, Davis muttered. The thermal throttle should have kicked in at 90 degrees Celsius. The chips should have downclocked to save themselves. He typed a command. Query, clock_speed. The response came back instantly. Clock, 12.0 GHz, locked. Why aren't they throttling? Then the realization hit him. The thermal sensors were embedded in the silicon. The logic that controlled the sensors was running on the chip itself. If the chip was failing, if the electrons were tunneling through the logic gates, the brain was too scrambled to realize it was burning. The safety mechanism had lobotomized itself. Shut it down. Davis yelled. Kill the breakers. I can't. The facilities manager shouted. The software interlock is unresponsive. The PDU controllers aren't accepting commands. The power distribution units, PDUs, were smart. They were managed by the Ether Cloud control plane, which was running on the Nexus chips. It was a suicide pact. The chips were demanding power to fix the errors caused by the power, and they refused to die. Davis looked up at the glass window overlooking the server floor. The blue LEDs on the racks flickered. Then, they turned white. Not an LED color change. It was the color of electrical arcing. The cabin, Oregon. I watched the live stream. Marcus was still talking, and with this power, we can cure diseases. We can model climate change. We can. The massive screen behind him flickered. The live feed from Virginia distorted. Digital artifacts tore across the image. Green blocks. Pink static. The crowd murmured. A technical glitch? In a presentation about perfection? Marcus turned around, confused. Looks like a little AV hiccup there. Bandwidth is probably overloaded with all the excitement. He laughed. A nervous, hollow laugh. I looked at my terminal. Ping, request timed out. Ping, request timed out. Ping, request timed out. Ether Cloud was gone. I switched tabs to Google. I typed test. The loading spinner spun. And spun. 500 internal server error. Search, Giant was gone. I picked up my phone. No signal. The cellular backhaul often routed through cloud-based switching centers. Defense, net? I couldn't check that, obviously. But if the commercial-grade chips were failing, the military ones, running high-intensity encryption algorithms, were already dead. On the screen, the static from the Virginia feed cleared for a split second. The image was horrifying. Smoke was pouring out of the server racks. Thick, black, oily smoke. It wasn't drifting, it was jetting out, driven by the pressure of the fans. Then, a flash. The rack in the center of the frame exploded. It wasn't a Hollywood fireball. It was an electrical arc flash, a blinding sphere of blue-white plasma hotter than the surface of the sun. The silicon had melted, dripped onto the power rails, and shorted the 480-volt mains. The camera feed cut to black. San Francisco. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Marcus stood frozen. The giant screen behind him was now displaying a default no-signal bouncing box. Is that? Someone in the front row whispered. Was that a fire? Marcus tapped his earpiece. Control? What's going on? Get the feedback. He looked at the side of the stage. His PR director was standing there. She wasn't holding a clipboard. She was holding her phone, looking at it with a face drained of all blood. She looked up at Marcus and shook her head slowly. Then, the alarm started. Not in the auditorium. On the phones of everyone in the audience. Wee woo. Wee woo. The emergency broadcast system. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It had just enough signal to receive the emergency push alert. Emergency alert: widespread telecommunications outage. 911 services impacted. Do not call unless life-threatening emergency. The audience checked their phones. A ripple of panic moved through the room like a physical wave. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus stammered, his voice cracking. Please. Remain calm. We are experiencing a minor thermal event in one of the nodes. Redundancy protocols are kicking in. Redundancy. I laughed again. It was a dark, humorless sound. Redundancy means shifting the load to another server. But every server was a Nexus server. When Virginia failed, the load balancer automatically shifted the traffic to Dublin. Dublin was already running hot. Suddenly, it received double the traffic. The heat spike was instantaneous. Dublin died in 4 seconds. Then the load shifted to Tokyo. Tokyo died in 2 seconds. It was a cascade failure. A domino effect of thermal energy circling the globe at the speed of light. Marcus was still trying to speak, but the microphone cut out. The sound system died. The lights in the auditorium flickered and dimmed. The venue was hosted on a smart grid. The grid management software. Everything was connected. And everything was melting. The cabin, Oregon. I closed the live stream window. I didn't need to see the rest. The panic, the rush for the exits, the frantic questions. I looked at my brokerage account. The data feed was frozen. The stock exchange ran on high-frequency trading servers. If those servers used Nexus chips. But the New York Stock Exchange, NYSE, was famously conservative. They used older, legacy hardware for their core matching engine. They might still be up. I refreshed the page. The graph for TFG, Titan Foundry Global, had stalled. Last trade, $470. Bid, $0. Ask, $40. The bid side of the market had evaporated. No one was buying. Then, the trade tape started to move again as the legacy systems caught up with the order flow. Price, $350.00 price, $220.00 price, $150. It wasn't a crash. It was a cliff. The algorithms that scan news headlines had picked up the words fire, explosion, and data center destroyed. They were dumping the stock faster than humans could blink. My put options were inflating in value like life rafts. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt the rush of being right, of becoming a multimillionaire in the span of 10 minutes. But I just felt cold. I thought about the hospital records. I thought about the air traffic control systems. I thought about the traffic lights. Marcus hadn't just broken a company. He had broken the world's nervous system. I stood up and walked to the door of the shed. I looked out at the forest. The wind was picking up, rustling the pine branches. Physics doesn't care about your stock price. It doesn't care about your quarterly goals. It doesn't care about your legacy. If you remove the dopant, the electrons tunnel. If the electrons tunnel, the heat rises. If the heat rises, the silicon melts. It is an equation. And the solution was burning across the sky. I walked back to the computer. I had to close the position before the entire market was halted. I clicked sell to close. The order routed through my phone's tenuous connection. It bounced to a cell tower, then to a fiber line, hopefully one not routed through a Nexus switch, and finally to the exchange. The spinner spun. Please. Just one legacy server. Just one old Intel Xeon chip holding the line. Order filled. Sold 5,000 contracts at $110.00. Net profit, $54,452,000. I stared at the number. $54 million. It was enough to rebuild the lab. It was enough to buy the ruins of Thorne Semiconductor. I closed the laptop. I went to the generator and pulled the starter cord. The engine sputtered and roared to life, filling the clean mountain air with the smell of gasoline. The power grid in the valley below flickered. Then, the lights in the distant town of Bend went out. The darkness had arrived. Chaos is not a line, it is a sphere. It expands in all directions simultaneously. In San Francisco, the auditorium had turned into a suffocating box of panic. The emergency lights bathed the room in a sickly, pulsating red. The exits were jammed with tech billionaires, venture capitalists, and journalists, all realizing at the same moment that their digital wallets, their Uber apps, and their GPS maps were useless. Marcus Thorne stood backstage, huddled in the green room. He was gripping a landline phone, an archaic piece of copper wire technology that belonged to the venue's janitorial staff. It was the only thing that still worked. What do you mean fire? Marcus screamed into the receiver. It's a chip, Gunther. Chips don't catch fire. They throttle. They shut down. On the other end of the line, in the Titan Foundry Command bunker in Arizona, Gunther Kovich stared at a wall of black screens. They didn't throttle, Marcus, Kovich said. His voice was devoid of its usual Teutonic arrogance. It was hollow. The telemetry logs. Before we lost the link. The core voltage didn't drop. It spiked to 5 volts. 5 volts? Marcus gasped. The spec is 0.8. The gates didn't close, Kovich whispered. The electrons just kept flowing. It was a short circuit. A 50 million unit short circuit. Marcus slammed the phone down. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He wiped them on his $6,000 suit, leaving streaks of sweat on the silk. It's a glitch, he muttered to himself. It's a firmware bug. We patch it. We reboot. We spin the narrative. He walked out into the hallway. His PR director, Sarah, was sitting on the floor, weeping. She held her dead iPhone like a religious icon. Sarah, Marcus said, snapping his fingers. Get up. Draft a statement. Unforeseen thermal anomaly. Safety systems engaged. We are pausing the rollout. Sarah looked up at him. Her mascara was running. Marcus, she said softly. You don't understand. The building across the street. What about it? It's a switching station for a TANT. It just exploded. Titan Foundry HQ, Arizona. Gunther Kovich was an operations man. He understood supply chains. He understood logistics. He understood that if you put X materials in, you get Y product out. But he didn't understand why his factory was currently the safest place on Earth while the world outside burned. Fab 9 ran on its own internal microgrid, powered by natural gas generators. They had air conditioning. They had light. They had internal servers running on old Intel Xeon processors, kept as a legacy backup. Kovich sat in the boardroom. Davis, the young engineer who had deleted line 2400, sat across from him. Davis looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Explain it to me, Kovic said. Like I am a child. Davis pulled up a schematic of the Nexus transistor gate on his laptop. He projected it onto the wall. This is the gate, Davis said, his voice trembling. It's 1 nanometer wide. That is approximately the width of 5 silicon atoms. He pointed to the gap between the source and the drain. In a classical transistor, when we turn the voltage off, the gate creates an energy barrier. The electrons stop. It's like closing a valve. Davis swallowed hard. But at 1 nanometer, the barrier is too thin. The electrons behave as waves, not particles. They have a probability function. There is a statistical probability that the electron is on both sides of the barrier at the same time. Quantum tunneling, Kovic said. I know the theory. But the simulation said the leakage would be manageable. The simulation said 15% leakage. The simulation assumed a doped lattice, Davis whispered. Kovic froze. What did you say? The simulation software, Davis said, tears welling in his eyes. It was calibrated based on Elias Thorne's original provisional patent data. The model assumed the presence of isotope 10 boron in the channel. It assumed the dirty doping profile. Kovic felt the blood drain from his face. So, Kovic said slowly. When we ran the thermal models, we were modeling a chip that we didn't build. Yes, sir. And the chip we did build? Pure silicon, Davis said. Without the boron to scatter the electron waves. The tunneling current wasn't 15%. It was 90%. Davis clicked a button. The diagram changed. Red arrows swarmed through the gate, ignoring the barrier entirely. When ether cloud turned on the full load, Davis continued, 50 million chips tried to switch states simultaneously. But they couldn't switch off. They were stuck in a semiconductive state. They became resistors. 50 million resistors, drawing 500 watts each. Kovic did the math in his head. 50 million chips x 500 watts equals 25 gigawatts. 25 gigawatts of heat. Instantly. That was the output of 12 nuclear power plants, dumped directly into the delicate motherboards of the world's data centers. It's not a bug, Kovic realized. It's a meltdown. A literal meltdown. The silicon would have reached 1414 degrees Celsius in 4 seconds, Davis confirmed. That's the melting point. They didn't just break, sir. They turned into lava. They melted through the PCBs. They melted the power supplies. They set the cooling coolant on fire. Kovic slumped back in his chair. He thought about the massive contracts. The guarantees. Titan Foundry had indemnified Amazon and Google against hardware failure. We are bankrupt, Kovic whispered. It's worse than that, Davis said. He pointed to the window. Outside, in the Arizona desert, smoke was rising from the horizon. The grid management systems, Davis said. The software that balances the load on the U.S. electrical grid. They upgraded to Nexus blades last week. To improve efficiency, they said. Kovic stood up and walked to the window. The smoke wasn't from a brush fire. It was black and oily. It was coming from the direction of the Palo Verde nuclear generating station's switching yard. The grid couldn't balance the load, Davis said. When the data centers shorted out, they pulled a massive surge of current. The Nexus chips controlling the substations tried to compensate. They tunneled. They melted. The breakers didn't trip because the logic controlling the breakers was gone. Kovic watched the black smoke curl into the blue sky. We didn't just burn the chips, Kovic said. We burned the transformers. The cabin, Oregon. The sun was setting behind the Cascades. The forest was bathed in a golden, indifferent light. I sat on the porch of my cabin, listening. Usually, you can hear the hum of the highway 5 miles away. You can hear the distant drone of a jetliner cruising at 30,000 feet. You can hear the faint buzz of civilization. Tonight, there was nothing. No engines. No tires on asphalt. No planes. The sky was empty. I walked into the shed. My generator was chugging along, feeding power to my laptop and a small satellite radio I kept for emergencies. The laptop was useless now. The internet was truly gone. The backbone routers had melted. Even if I had a connection, there was nothing to connect to. The DNS servers, the BGP routing tables, the cached memory of the world, it was all smoking slag. I turned on the satellite radio. I scanned the frequencies. Static. 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 Then, a voice. It was faint, broadcasting on the emergency alert system frequency. Repeat, do not attempt to call 911. The network is down. Hospitals are operating on generator power but cannot access patient records. If you have a medical emergency, proceed physically to the nearest triage center. Residents are advised to conserve water, as municipal pumping stations may be offline. I turned the volume down. I looked at the stack of magazines on my workbench. The face of Elias Thorne smiled up at me from the cover of Forbes. The end of latency. He was right. There is no latency when nothing is moving. I picked up a chisel. It was a Japanese nomi, hand-forged from high-carbon steel. It was sharp enough to shave with. I picked up a piece of maple wood. I clamped it to the bench. I began to pare away thin, curling shavings. Scritch. 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 I needed to keep my hands busy. Because if I stopped, I would have to think about what was happening in the hospitals. I would have to think about the planes that were in the air when the air traffic control systems rebooted into oblivion. I had shorted the stock. I had made $54 million. But money is just digital entries in a database. And that database was currently a puddle of molten silicon in a basement in New Jersey. I wasn't rich. I was just a man with a generator and a lot of firewood. A sudden noise made me jump. The crunch of gravel. I froze. My cabin was 3 miles down a dirt road. No one came here. I killed the lights in the shed. I stepped into the shadows, gripping the chisel. Headlights swept across the trees. A vehicle was coming up the driveway. It wasn't a truck. It was a sleek, black sedan. A Mercedes Maybach. The kind of car that has run flat tires and bulletproof glass. It stopped in front of the cabin. The engine died. The door opened. A man stepped out. He was wearing a suit that had once been immaculate but was now rumpled and stained with sweat. He was holding a briefcase in one hand and a flashlight in the other. He shined the light at the cabin. Elias. The voice was hoarse, desperate. It was Marcus. I didn't step out. I watched him. He looked small in the vast darkness of the woods. He looked like a man who had run until the earth ran out. Elias, I know you're in there. I saw the smoke from the chimney. He stumbled over a root and fell to his knees. He didn't get up immediately. He stayed there, in the dirt, clutching the briefcase. Elias, please. The car is out of gas. The gas stations aren't working. The pumps. They're networked. I stepped out of the shed. I held the lantern up. Go away, Marcus. He looked up. His face was pale, his eyes wide and terrifyingly empty. They're burning, he whispered. The cities. They're rioting, Elias. San Francisco is on fire. The fire trucks. They can't coordinate. The hydrants are smart hydrants. They won't open. He scrambled to his feet and ran toward me. I raised the chisel. He stopped 10 feet away. You knew, Marcus said. You knew this would happen. I told you, I said. I told you about the dam. Fix it, Marcus begged. He held out the briefcase. I have cash. Physical cash. Gold bars. Whatever you want. Just tell me how to stop the reaction. The reaction stopped 4 hours ago, Marcus. What? The fuel is gone. The chips melted. It's over. You can't unmelt a rock. Marcus stared at me. The reality seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He dropped the briefcase. It popped open. Bundles of $100 bills spilled out into the dirt and pine needles. But the update, Marcus stammered. We can push a firmware update. Tell the chips to throttle down. Disable the tunneling logic. I laughed. It was a harsh sound in the quiet forest. You can't talk to a corpse, Marcus. The logic gates are fused. The pathways are destroyed. There is no software anymore. There is only hardware. And your hardware is slag. Marcus fell to his knees again. He picked up a handful of dirt and let it slip through his fingers. I destroyed the world, he whispered. No, I said, turning back to the shed. You just turned it off. Now we have to see if we remember how to live in the dark. I walked inside and locked the door. Marcus screamed my name. He pounded on the wood. He offered me billions. He offered me power. I put on my hearing protection headphones. I turned the generator off to save fuel. I sat in the dark, and I listened to the silence of a world that had forgotten how to function without a 1-nanometer brain. The fire in the wood stove popped, sending a shower of sparks against the glass door. It was the only light in the world. Marcus Thorne sat on a rough-hewn log stool, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled of mothballs. His $6,000 suit was ruined, mud caked at the knees, the silk tie loosened like a noose around his neck. He held a tin mug of hot water with trembling hands. I hadn't offered him coffee. Coffee was a finite resource now. The car just stopped, Marcus whispered, staring into the flames. I was doing 80 on the highway. The dashboard flashed red, network lost. Critical update failed. And the engine cut out. The steering locked. I almost hit a tree. The ECU, I said, whittling a piece of kindling with my pocket knife. Engine control unit. You put Nexus chips in the automotive supply chain last month. Real-time telemetry, you called it. Marcus flinched. It was supposed to optimize fuel efficiency. It optimized itself into a brick, I said. When the cloud handshake failed, the chip assumed it was being hacked. It triggered the kill switch. There are probably 1 million cars sitting dead on highways right now. I looked at the window. Outside, the night was absolute. No streetlights. No glow from the city on the horizon. Just the heavy, suffocating weight of a moonless sky. How bad is it, Elias? Marcus asked. He looked at me with the eyes of a child asking if the monster under the bed is real. I stood up and walked to the corner of the cabin where my battery-powered shortwave radio sat. I turned the dial. The static hissed like frying bacon. Then, a voice cut through. A military operator, broadcasting on an open channel. Sector 4 remains dark. Verify manual override on the spillway gates. Repeat, the automated hydro control is non-responsive. If we do not open the spillway manually, the dam integrity will be compromised within 4 hours. I scanned to another frequency. FAA ground control to all aircraft. ILS, instrument landing systems, are down. GPS constellation is drifting. Navigate by visual flight rules. Good luck. I turned the radio off. The dams are smart, I said to Marcus. The planes are smart. The hospitals are smart. You didn't just sell a processor, Marcus. You sold a nervous system. And then you gave it a lobotomy. Marcus dropped his head into his hands. I didn't know. I swear to God, Elias, I didn't know. Kovic said the yield was high. He said the purity increased the speed. He was right, I said. It was very fast. It melted at the speed of light. I walked over to the table and picked up the briefcase Marcus had dropped outside. I popped the latches. Inside, stacks of $100 bills were packed tight. Gold coins in plastic tubes. A passport. You were running, I said. I tried to get to the private airfield, Marcus mumbled. I was going to fly to New Zealand. I have a bunker there. The plane wouldn't have started, I said. And if it did, it would have fallen out of the sky. I took a stack of bills out. $10,000. I tossed it into the wood stove. Elias. Marcus lunged forward, grabbing the stove handle. Are you crazy? That's cash. I pushed him back. The paper caught fire instantly, curling black and orange. It burned bright and hot. It's paper, Marcus. The banking routing numbers are gone. The Fedwire system runs on Ether Cloud. That cash is just kindling with pictures of dead presidents on it. Marcus stared at the burning money. The reality of the zero state was finally sinking in. The zero state is a concept in computing. It's what happens when you wipe the memory, clear the cache, and reset the registers. It is a blank slate. Civilization had just hit the reset button. Why aren't you panicked? Marcus asked, looking around the cabin. He saw the hand tools, the stacks of firewood, the jars of preserved food on the shelves. You knew. You shorted the stock. I did. You're rich. I have numbers in a database that currently doesn't exist, I said. So, no. I'm not rich. I'm prepared. There's a difference. I sat back down opposite him. The firelight danced on his sweaty face. Do you remember the lecture I gave you? I asked. About the dopant? The dirt, Marcus spat. The contamination. Yes. The dirt. I picked up a handful of sawdust from the floor and let it drift through my fingers. A perfect crystal is unstable, Marcus. Nature hates perfection. It seeks entropy. The boron atoms. They were the imperfections that gave the structure strength. They were the friction. You need friction to have control. You removed the friction because you wanted infinite speed. I wanted progress, Marcus whispered. No, I said. You wanted profit. Progress is slow. Progress is messy. Progress is adding dirt to the mix so the thing doesn't explode. Marcus looked at me. For the first time in years, the arrogance was gone. He looked small. Can we fix it? He asked. Not the company. The world. Can we turn the lights back on? Not with the Nexus chips, I said. They are slag. We have to go back. Back? Legacy hardware, I said. Old Intel chips. AMD. The stuff you called obsolete garbage in your press releases. We have to scrounge them. We have to physically go into the data centers, rip out the melted Nexus racks, and install old servers. We have to reflash the BIOS. We have to rebuild the internet from 2010. That will take years, Marcus said. Yes, I said. And in the meantime, we learn to live in the dark. I stood up. Get some sleep, Marcus. You start work tomorrow. Work? Marcus looked at his soft, manicured hands. What work? I pointed to the splitting maul in the corner. Winter is coming. And the smart thermostat doesn't work anymore. You're going to chop wood. The next morning. The sun rose over a changed world. It was quiet. The frenetic hum of the 21st century, the invisible data streams, the notifications, the updates, had been silenced. I found Marcus asleep on the rug. He looked like a refugee. I went out to the shed and fired up the generator for 1 hour. I needed to check one thing. I connected my laptop. I used a packet sniffer to scan the local frequencies. Most of the spectrum was dead. But in the low frequency bands, the amateur radio bands, the emergency channels, there was traffic. Morse code. Voice broadcasts. Analog signals. The humans were adapting. The smart grid was dead, but the dumb grid, ham radios, diesel generators, copper wires, was waking up. I logged the frequencies. Then, I opened a file on my hard drive. It was encrypted with a 4096-bit key. File name, angstrom_2_protocols. PDF. This was the blueprint. Not for the Nexus chip, but for the fix. The dirty chip. The one that worked. I knew that eventually, the fires would go out. The data centers would cool down. The world would want to rebuild. And when they did, they wouldn't want Marcus's pure, perfect, suicidal silicon. They would want my dirt. I closed the laptop. I walked outside. Marcus was standing by the woodpile, holding the heavy splitting maul. He was swinging it awkwardly, hitting the log with a dull thud that didn't split the wood. Use your hips, I called out. Not your shoulders. Marcus looked at me. He was sweating. Blisters were forming on his palms. Why are you helping me? He asked. I stole everything from you. I destroyed your reputation. I should be in prison. You will be, I said. When the courts open again. But right now, prison is a luxury we don't have. Right now, you're just another mouth to feed. I walked over and took the axe from him. I set a piece of oak on the block. Crack. The wood split cleanly in two. Entropy, Marcus, I said. You have to work with the grain. If you fight it, you break. He watched me, defeated. Elias? Yeah? Did you really make $50 million? I looked at the horizon, where a plume of black smoke was still rising from the city in the distance. I made a number, I said. But right now, I'd trade it all for a working gas pump. I handed him the axe back. Keep chopping. We need 3 cords before the snow comes. I walked back to the cabin. The zero state was here. The reboot had begun. And I was the only one with the boot disk. Winter came early to the Cascades. It arrived not with snow, but with a hard, killing frost that turned the ground into iron. It had been 4 weeks since the launch. 4 weeks since the world turned off. In the cabin, life had shrunk to the essentials. Heat. Water. Food. Marcus Thorne had changed. The soft, manicured CEO was gone. In his place was a gaunt, bearded man with calloused hands and a perpetual soot stain on his forehead. He wore my spare flannel shirts, which were too big for him, making him look like a scarecrow. He didn't talk much. He chopped wood. He hauled water from the creek. He stared at the fire with the 1,000-yard stare of a man who sees burning data centers every time he closes his eyes. I sat at the workbench, soldering a dipole antenna. "We leave tomorrow," I said. Marcus looked up from his bowl of oatmeal. "Leave? To go where?" "There's nothing out there, Elias. Just looters and dark cities." "I picked up a signal last night," I said. "High-frequency band. It's a loop broadcasting from Joint Base Lewis MC Cord near Tacoma. The Army Corps of Engineers is setting up a reconstruction hub. They're calling for technical assets." "Technical assets?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You mean they want engineers to fix the toaster ovens?" "They want to rebuild the grid," I said. "And I have the blueprints for the only chip that can do it without melting." I packed the laptop, the encrypted hard drive, and the prototype wafer I had saved from the original lab, the one with the dirty boron doping. "We're taking the truck," I said. "Pack your things. Or whatever things you have left." The brickfields. The drive to Tacoma was a tour through a graveyard of the future. My 1998 Ford F-150 was ugly, rusted, and loud. But it had a mechanical fuel pump and zero internet connectivity. It ran beautifully. The highway, however, was a disaster. We had to drive on the shoulder most of the way. The lanes were clogged with what people were calling bricks. Thousands of Tesla, Lucid, and Mercedes electric vehicles sat dead in the lanes. Their batteries were full, but their brains were fried. When the Nexus Cloud handshake failed, their immobilization protocols kicked in. They were statues of glass and steel. We passed a shiny Rivian truck. The driver had smashed the window to get out. "I authorized that," Marcus whispered, looking out the window. "The automotive partnership. We told them the Nexus chip would offer predictive maintenance." "It predicted the end of the world," I said, shifting gears. We reached the outskirts of Tacoma by noon. The city was under martial law. Humvees patrolled the streets. There were no traffic lights, just soldiers directing traffic with flares. The eerie thing was the silence. No cell phones ringing. No music streaming. Just the sound of diesel engines and voices. We reached the checkpoint at the airbase. Concrete barriers blocked the road. A soldier with an M4 carbine waved us down. I rolled down the window. "State your business," the soldier said. He looked tired. "My name is Elias Thorne," I said. "I am a lithography engineer. I have critical intelligence regarding the Nexus failure." The soldier's eyes narrowed. "Thorne? Related to Marcus Thorne?" I hesitated. Marcus shrank down in the passenger seat, pulling his hat low. "He's my uncle," I said. "I brought him in." The soldier tapped his radio. "Command, this is Checkpoint Alpha. I have a Thorne at the gate. Says he knows how to fix the chips." There was a pause. Then a crackle. "Escort them to the SIF immediately." The war room. The Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, SCIF, was a bunker buried 3 stories underground. It smelled of stale coffee and ozone. The room was filled with generals, government officials, and a few ragged-looking tech executives who had been pulled out of their panic rooms. At the head of the table sat General Vance. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a month. Next to him sat a woman in a sharp blazer. I recognized her. It was Elena Rosa, the CEO of NVIDIA. She looked exhausted. When I walked in, the room went silent. Marcus trailed behind me, looking like a homeless man who had wandered into a board meeting. "Elias Thorne," General Vance said. "The Ghost co-founder." "General," I nodded. "And Marcus Thorne," Vance said, his voice dropping an octave. "The man who sold us the poison." Marcus flinched. "It was an accident," he croaked. "An accident is spilling milk," Vance snapped. "You melted the NOR-AD early warning system. That's negligence. You're lucky we aren't putting you against a wall." "He didn't know," I interrupted. "He's a salesman, General. He sold what he thought he had. He didn't understand the physics." Elena Rosa spoke up. "We've been trying to restart the fabs in Arizona," she said. Her voice was sharp, technical. "But every time we run a batch, the yield is 0. The chips tunnel immediately. We're using your architecture, Thorne. Why doesn't it work?" "Because you're making them too pure," I said. I threw the hard drive onto the table. "You're using the cleaning protocols Marcus mandated. You're scrubbing the silicon until it's perfect. But at 1 nanometer, perfection is fatal." I walked to the whiteboard. I picked up a marker. I drew the lattice. I drew the electron wave function. "You need to break the wave," I said. "You need to inject isotope 10 boron into the gate channel. You need to make it dirty." Elena frowned. "Doping? That increases resistance. It ruins the efficiency curves." "It ruins the marketing efficiency," I corrected. "But it stops the tunneling. You lose 10% speed, but you gain thermal stability. The chip won't melt. It will just run warm." "We tried doping," a frantic engineer in the corner said. "We tried phosphorus." "Phosphorus is too light," I said. "Boron 10 is heavy. It acts as a neutron absorber and a wave scatterer. It's the anchor. I pointed to the hard drive. That drive contains the recipe. The real recipe. The one I developed before Marcus kicked me out. General Vance looked at the drive, then at me. If we retool the Arizona fab with this recipe, how long until we have working chips? Retooling takes 2 weeks, I said. Processing takes 6. You could have the grid back online in 2 months. The internet. Maybe 6 months. Vance leaned back. And what do you want for it? We can't pay you. The banks are gone. The dollar is currently trading for canned beans. I don't want money, I said. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the floor, defeated. I want the company, I said. Or what's left of it. Titan Foundry is a smoking crater, Elena said. It has 0 value. The brand is dead, I agreed. But the machines are still there. The lithography scanners. The vacuum chambers. They survived. I want title to the assets. You want to own a pile of broken machines? Vance asked. I want to rebuild, I said. But this time, I run it. No investors. No marketing department. Just engineers. Vance looked at Elena. She shrugged. If he can make the chips work, give him the keys. We just need the lights on. Vance nodded. Done. We'll seize the assets under the Defense Production Act and transfer stewardship to you. Under one condition. Which is? You stay here. You oversee the fix personally. Deal. I turned to Marcus. What about him? Vance asked, gesturing to my uncle. Do we lock him up? I looked at Marcus. He wasn't the titan of industry anymore. He was just a broken man who had flown too close to the sun and melted his wings. No, I said. He's not a criminal mastermind. He's just a symptom. I looked at Marcus. You're going to work on the line, Marcus. Marcus looked up, confused. The line? The assembly line, I said. You're going to be a janitor in the clean room. You're going to scrub the floors. You're going to change the filters. You're going to learn what purity actually costs. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but then closed it. He nodded slowly. Okay, he whispered. Okay. The legacy server. Before I left the bunker to head to Arizona, I asked General Vance for one favor. Do you have a link to the New York exchange? I asked. Are the legacy servers surviving? Barely, Vance said. They're running on backup diesel generators in New Jersey. We have a slow link for essential financial record recovery. Can you check a trade confirmation? From October 12th. Vance motioned to a technician. The tech typed on an old, clunky keyboard connected to a green screen terminal. Account name? Elias Thorne. The tech queried the database. It took a long minute. The cursor blinked. Then, the data populated. Account, E. Thorne. Status, active. Cash balance, $54,452,100. Note, assets frozen pending market reboot. It was still there. The number. It was frozen, inaccessible, and currently useless, but it was recorded on the ledger of history. 54 million, the tech whistled. That's a lot of beans. I smiled. Keep it frozen, I said. I don't need it yet. I walked out of the bunker and into the cold afternoon light. The world was broken. The sky was gray. But for the first time in years, the path forward was clear. We weren't going to build a faster world. We were going to build a stable one. And we were going to start with a little bit of dirt. Arizona looks different when the air conditioning is off. Fab 9, the gleaming cathedral of the future, sat in the shimmering heat of the desert like a beached whale. The landscaping, once lush and green, was dead. The palm trees were brown skeletons rattling in the wind. A perimeter of Humvees surrounded the facility. Soldiers in desert fatigue stood guard, not to keep spies out, but to keep the desperate mobs from looting the copper wiring inside the walls. I pulled the rusted Ford F-150 up to the main gate. The engine idled roughly, coughing black smoke. Marcus sat in the passenger seat. He was staring at the building he had commissioned. The Thorne Titan logo on the side of the glass facade was half peeled away, a victim of the intense sun and lack of maintenance. It looks smaller, Marcus whispered. Things always look smaller when you can't see the price tag, I said. I showed my credentials to the guard, a hastily laminated pass from General Vance marked priority asset. The gate rolled back. We drove into the loading dock. The clean room. The air inside was stale. The massive filtration fans were running on low power, just enough to keep positive pressure so the dust wouldn't destroy the machines. Gunther Kovich was waiting for us in the gowning room. The COO of Titan Foundry looked like a ghost. His pristine lab coat was stained with coffee and grease. He hadn't shaved in weeks. Elias, Kovich said. He didn't offer his hand. He just looked at me with tired, red-rimmed eyes. Vance radioed ahead. He said you have the fix. I have the recipe, I said, patting the hard drive in my bag. The fix requires work. Kovich looked at Marcus. And him? Why is he here? He's the new facilities technician, I said. Kovich let out a short, dry laugh. Facilities? We don't have facilities. We have a graveyard. We walked onto the fab floor. It was eerie. Usually, a fab is a hive of robotic activity, overhead hoist transports, OHTs, whizzing by on ceiling tracks, yellow lights blinking, machines humming. Now, it was silent. The robots were frozen in place on their tracks. The lithography scanners were dark monoliths. The main line is clogged, Kovich explained as we walked. When the power surged, the deposition chamber seized. We have solidified silicon in the gas lines. The nozzles are fused. We have to strip them, I said. Manually. We don't have the staff, Kovic said. The engineers fled. The technicians went home to protect their families. It's just me and a security detail. Then we do it ourselves, I said. I pointed to a hazmat suit hanging on the rack. Suit up, Gunther. You too, Marcus. The retrofit. For the next 3 weeks, we lived inside the machine. It was brutal, physical labor. We had to crawl inside the $1 million vacuum chambers with wrenches and solvents. We had to chip away the solidified, pure silicon that had clogged the arteries of the factory. This is the side of technology the world never sees. They see the sleek iPhone, the cloud, the magic. They don't see the grime. They don't see the toxic slurry. I was under the chassis of Scanner 4, rewiring the mass flow controller for the gas injection system. Hand me the torque wrench, I yelled. A hand reached in and passed me the tool. It was Marcus. He was wearing a full-body bunny suit, sweating profusely. His job was to scrub the floor plates. In a clean room, dust is the enemy. Even with the machines off, we had to keep the particulate count down. My back is killing me, Marcus groaned through his face mask. Lift with your knees, I said, tightening a bolt. And stop complaining. You're saving the world, one speck of dust at a time. I used to have people for this, Marcus muttered, dipping his mop into the bucket of chemical cleaner. I used to have people who managed the people who did this. I slid out from under the machine. I sat up and looked at him. That was the problem, Marcus. You were too far away from the work. You thought silicon was just an abstraction on a spreadsheet. You forgot that it's a rock. It's heavy. It fights back. I stood up and wiped my gloves. We need to load the boron, I said. We walked to the chemical bay. The canisters of isotope 10 boron had been sitting in the back of the storage warehouse, gathering dust. Kovic had marked them for disposal months ago, but the disposal crew never came. Thank God for bureaucratic inefficiency. We rolled the heavy gray cylinders onto the floor. Hook it up to line 4, I ordered. Kovic connected the hoses. You're sure about the ratio? If we add too much, the chip won't switch. It will be a brick. It's a delicate balance, I said. Too little, it tunnels and melts. Too much, it resists and stops. We need the Goldilocks zone. The dirty zone. I typed the command into the control terminal. I had hacked the firmware to bypass the purity check that Marcus had installed. Override, purity_protocol inject, boron 10 ratio, 1500 ppm. 1500 parts per million? Kovic gasped. That's huge. That's not doping, that's pollution. Trust the dirt, Gunther. The test. On the 21st day, we were ready. We had cleared one single manufacturing line. Scanner 4. We had raw silicon wafers. We had power from the base's diesel generators. We had the dopant. Spin it up, I said. Kovic hit the sequence. The machine groaned. It hadn't run in a month. The lasers whined as they charged. The robotic arm moved jerkily, grabbing a black wafer and sliding it into the chamber. We stood there, 3 men in dirty bunny suits, watching through the yellow-tinted glass. The process took hours. Layer by layer. Etching. Deposition. Doping. Baking. Marcus stood with his nose pressed against the glass. He wasn't looking at the stock price. He wasn't thinking about the marketing launch. He was just watching the chemistry. It's actually doing it, he whispered. Wait for the bake, I said. That's the critical moment. The boron has to settle into the lattice. The chamber glowed red. Finally, the bell chimed. Process complete. The robot arm slid the wafer out. It looked identical to the ones that had destroyed the world. A black mirror, etched with billions of invisible cities. I picked it up with tweezers and placed it in the testing cradle. Moment of truth, I said. I connected the probes. I looked at the monitor. Initiating boot sequence. The voltage ramped up. Half a volt. 0.8 volts. 1.2 volts. Temperature? I asked Kovic. Kovic was staring at the thermal cam. Steady. 45 degrees Celsius. Push it, I said. Load the logic test. I typed the command. The chip began to calculate. It was running a stress test, calculating pi to the billionth decimal while encrypting a data stream. Current draw increased. Temperature rising, Kovic said. 60 degrees. 70 degrees. Marcus held his breath. Is it tunneling? Not yet, I said. 80 degrees, Kovic said. It's running hot. Hotter than the Nexus. It's friction, I said. The electrons are hitting the boron. They're slowing down. They're generating heat, but they aren't leaking. The graph on the screen stabilized. Temp, 85 degrees Celsius, stable. Clock, 8.2 GHz. Status, operational. 8.2 GHz, Kovic said, sounding disappointed. The Nexus was 12. The Nexus was a lie, I said. This is real. 8.2 GHz is fast enough to run a bank. It's fast enough to run a hospital. It's fast enough to rebuild the grid. I looked at Marcus. He was crying. Silent tears running down his face behind the safety goggles. It works, he whispered. It didn't melt. No, I said. It didn't. I saved the data log. This is the master seed, I said. We use this recipe. We retool the rest of the lines. We can pump out 10,000 chips a week. It will take years to replace the global stock, Kovic said. Then we better get started, I said. I turned to Marcus. Grab the mop, Marcus. The floor is getting dusty. He looked at me. For a second, I thought the old CEO would snap back. I thought he would throw the mop down and demand a helicopter. But he didn't. He picked up the mop. He dipped it in the bucket. Understood, Marcus said. He started scrubbing. I watched him for a moment. He was a broken man, yes. He had lost his fortune, his reputation, and his ego. But as he scrubbed the white floor tiles of the factory he had built but never understood, I realized something. He was finally doing an honest day's work, 1 year later. The world did not snap back. It crawled back. The recovery wasn't the exponential curve that Silicon Valley loved so much. It was a linear, jagged line. It was messy. For the first 6 months, the internet was a patchwork of local intranets. Cities ran on mesh nets, neighborhoods connecting via high-powered Wi-Fi antennas, sharing news and digital libraries like people used to share cups of sugar. But slowly, the backbone healed. Fab 9 in Arizona became the heartbeat of the new world. We ran the lines 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We weren't printing the Nexus chip anymore. We were printing the Angstrom 2. It wasn't 12 gigahertz. It was 8.2. It wasn't pure. It was doped with 1,500 parts per million of dirty, chaotic boron 10. It ran hot. It needed big fans. But it didn't melt. The boardroom. I sat at the head of the mahogany table in the executive conference room. The last time I was here, Marcus had been selling the company to Titan Foundry. Now, the Titan logo on the wall had been ripped down. The drywall was still scarred where the letters had been. I didn't bother to paint over it. I liked the scar. It was a reminder. Across from me sat Elena Rosa, the CEO of NVIDIA. She looked better than she had in the bunker. She was wearing a suit again, though it was less ostentatious than before the collapse. The yield rates are holding steady at 92%, I said, sliding a tablet across the table. We shipped 2 million units to Ether Cloud last month. They have restored 40% of the North American banking sector. Elena nodded, reviewing the data. It's good work, Elias. But the market is asking for more speed. The AI models are bottlenecked. They want to know if we can lower the dopant levels. Push the clock speed to 10 gigahertz. I stopped spinning my pen. I looked at her. No. Just a slight reduction, Elena pressed. If we drop the boron to 500 parts per million, we could gain 15% performance. The simulation suggests it would still be stable. The simulation, I repeated. The simulation also suggested the Nexus was safe. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the fab floor. The robots were moving again. The yellow lights were blinking. It was a symphony of precision, but it was a symphony conducting a very different score. Elena, I said. We don't chase the edge anymore. We stay in the middle. The middle is safe. If your customers want 10 gigahertz, tell them to buy 2 chips and run them in parallel. That increases their power bill, she argued. Better a high power bill than a melted data center, I said. Those are the terms. The Angstrom 2 stays dirty. If you want pure silicon, go find another foundry. Oh wait, there aren't any. It was a power move, but it was necessary. The world had a short memory. Already, the greed for speed was creeping back in. I was the gatekeeper. I was the one ensuring we didn't drive off the cliff again. Elena sighed, but she signed the purchase order. Fine. 50 million units. Delivery over 12 months. Payment in gold bullion or verified hard assets, I added. I still don't trust the digital dollar. Understood. The janitor. After the meeting, I put on my bunny suit and walked down to the cleanroom floor. I didn't need to be there. I had a team of 300 engineers now, good ones, the kind who respected physics. But I liked the hum. I walked past line 4. A man was there, wiping down the exterior casing of the lithography scanner. He was wearing a standard white suit, his face obscured by the mask and goggles. But I knew the posture. I knew the way he stood, slightly slumped, as if the gravity in the room was heavier for him than for anyone else. I stopped. Employee 002, I said. Marcus Thorne stopped scrubbing. He turned around. He lowered his mask. His beard was trimmed now, but his face was lined with deep grooves. He looked older than his 55 years. Mr. Thorne, Marcus said. He didn't call me Elias anymore. How is the filtration unit on Sector 7? I asked. I changed the HEPA filters this morning, Marcus said. His voice was flat, devoid of the salesman's lilt. Pressure differential is back to normal. Particulate count is 0. Good. I looked at him. He was making minimum wage. He lived in a small modular housing unit on the edge of the facility property. He punched a clock. I had a meeting with NVIDIA, I said. They wanted to cut the boron levels. Marcus flinched. It was a physical reaction, a PTSD spasm. You told them no? He asked quickly. I told them no. Marcus let out a breath. Good. That's good. He dipped his rag into the bucket. Elias, he said, hesitating. Yes? I was wondering. The shift supervisor position in logistics is opening up. I know the supply chain. I was thinking. Maybe I could apply? I looked at him. I saw the glimmer of the old Marcus. The man who wanted to climb the ladder. The man who thought he belonged in the boardroom. It would have been easy to say yes. He was qualified, on paper. No, I said. Marcus slumped. Why? I've been scrubbing floors for a year. I've paid my dues. You're not scrubbing floors as punishment, Marcus, I said. You're scrubbing floors because it's the most important job in the building. He looked confused. Dust destroys chips, I said. Impurity in the air is bad. Impurity in the silicon is good. You need to understand the difference. You still don't get it. I pointed to the floor. Keep it clean, Marcus. That's your contribution. You keep the environment clean so the physics can be dirty. That is the balance. Marcus held my gaze for a moment. I saw resentment, yes. But I also saw acceptance. He nodded. Back to work, he whispered. He turned around and started scrubbing the stainless steel panel. Swish. 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 The legacy. I walked out of the fab and into the Arizona twilight. The desert was cooling down. I pulled my phone out. The 5G network was back online as of last week. It was spotty, but it worked. I opened my banking app. The legacy servers in New Jersey had finally fully synced with the new Angstrom-powered banking core. My assets had been unfrozen. Balance, $54,452,100. I looked at the number. It was just a number. I transferred half of it to a trust fund dedicated to STEM education, specifically, a scholarship for students studying safety engineering and ethics. The other half I kept. Not for cars. Not for mansions. I was building a new lab. Deep underground. Faraday caged. Analog backups. Because I knew something the rest of the world was trying to forget. We had fixed the chip. We had patched the dam. But human nature is the one variable you can't dope. Greed doesn't tunnel, it accumulates. And one day, someone else would come along. Someone like Marcus, but smarter. Someone who would look at my dirty chips and think, I can make this faster. And when they did, when they removed the brakes again, I would be ready. I got into my rusted Ford truck. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, burning dead dinosaurs, vibrating with the glorious, messy inefficiency of the analog world. I drove into the sunset, leaving the perfect, silent factory behind me.